Good morning, everyone. I thought I'd do another drive with Dom. It's been a while. Much has changed at Supercharged over the years. We started doing this league back in 2023. It's now 2025, and we're getting close to the end of the 2025 summer session. So I think we've done 5 or 6 leagues thus far. Much has changed over that time. A couple things in particular. One of which is the carts themselves. So the batteries have gotten much older, obviously, and as a consequence, the carts have gotten slower. And there's, quite a bit more variation, I would say, between the carts in that perhaps some of them received replacement batteries at some point along the line, and others didn't, et cetera, so forth and so on. So in general, what we've seen are lap times falling off by about 2 or 3 seconds on both tracks since we started doing this. The other thing that has changed is tire. These Remos originally came, I believe, with some Dunlop tires that were a bit stickier than what they're using now, which perhaps are more durable. And then finally is the track itself. The track is a combination of plywood and asphalt. Okay, so the bottom level, like you can see here, is paved. And this is sort of like your normal track surface. But it's really only relevant for the bottom sector, the last sector, and maybe the first little bit of the track. The rest of the track, as you're going to see here, we leave the asphalt and go up onto the plywood surface, which is painted, and presumably that paint has some sort of texture stuff in it. And over time, you can see how there's little white spots, like for example there on the apex, there on the apex. That is the paint being worn through and starting to show, and showing rather, the asphalt underneath, or the plywood underneath. So there's 2 different surfaces. The track itself, being made of plywood, is very sensitive to temperature. Generally speaking, when we're racing over the course of the evening, the track gets warmer, the tires get warmer, grip goes up, lap times drop. This dynamic has also changed somewhat, where it seems to take longer for the track to get warmed up, or rather it's taking the same time, but it just doesn't ever get as gripped up as it used to. So anyway, long story short, we are posting slower lap times, and the track is a hell of a lot more slippery. So for example, in my outlap here, you'll see me do something that has only happened twice in my many sessions of racing at Supercharged, which is I lose, or rather I don't have enough grip to not hit the wall here. Wham. That's only happened to me once before. So anyway, that's the cart not biting where I thought it would, and we're sliding around. So anyway, I thought I would do a walkthrough on the track and sort of how to navigate it, especially considering that things have changed and things are less grippy. So this is heat 1, and in heat 1, we are at the low point of grip. The tires aren't particularly warm, and the track isn't particularly warm. I think this night we were the 3rd group out, so it's not a complete ice rink, but it is pretty slippery. So with this new slipperiness comes some changes to approach. Like I think the other guys and gals that race here would say the same, that it's gotten much more important to be driving with your right foot. In other words, you have to do a lot more throttle modulation on turns now than you did before. It used to be that at Supercharged you could just go flat, for example, around the track on speed 3, which is the public speed. I don't know if that's still the case or not, because I don't do the speed 3 sessions anymore. But certainly in the speed 4 league sessions, I've found, and I think the others have found as well, that you do have to take off more speed to go through corners than you used to. Otherwise, you will push wide, you will slide, and you will be slow. So we have done an outlap, and we are now approaching what's basically the final corner of the track, which leads into the start-finish. This corner, like all corners at Supercharged, does not involve any braking. What you are doing is you are reducing speed instead of braking. This is because these karts don't have any coast. They feel more like they are direct drive, and when you reduce throttle, you get a proportionate reduction in speed, and it feels very instantaneous. So braking is not necessary. What you will simply do is reduce speed. So into this corner, you'll see that my approach is to hold the left-hand edge, and then I will be reducing throttle instead of braking to try to get down to the apex, and then getting back into the throttle as I'm approaching the apex. So down we go, and then back on, and then out. The first corner, 2 corners, whatever you want to call that, they're really straightforward. Just, clip both apexes. Here, we're coming up to sort of one of the signature corners of this track, which is the uphill corkscrew. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but you'll notice I approach by holding the left edge. And then importantly, what I'm doing here is I'm going to hold this right side as long as I can. And I will then turn in, after having held the right side, sort of aiming for an apex around the corner that I can't see. And I'll apex kind of, 3/4 of the way up, if you will, and then ride it out to right where that guy was, right here. So my suggestion to you on this one is, when the track is cold, you're going to have to reduce some speed right about here. So before you turn in, or maybe right as you turn in, you might want to go, instead of 100% throttle, maybe take it down to 85 or 90 or something, because you're going to push. The front end is not going to grip 100% yet on cold tires, and you will push, push, push. So if you reduce a little bit of throttle right before you turn in, it sort of shifts the weight forwards, gives you as much front end grip as you can get, and lets you get up here to the apex. And you'll see over the course of the evening, that gets better and better. This turn here is interesting. What matters here is that this turn sets you up for the next corner, which is a double apex left, that begins your run down to the bottom ramp section, which is the really cool part of the track. What I think matters here is how you exit this corner. So you see those blue and white lines to my left. You don't want your kart in there. If you end up going around the turn that we were just doing, and you wash wide out here, you end up getting cramped for the turn that the fellow in front of me is taking. So you want to try to end up middle track here. And I don't know really how to explain this, but you want to make sure that you unwind. So you'll see here I'm pointing straight, I've turned in, and then I've unwound. The unwinding, I think, keeps you from washing. So bear that in mind. All right, so this part here, again, you can sort of skin this cat a variety of ways. You can either go to the right side of the track or take it from the middle. I have been taking this more and more from the middle, even though the cart is, the track is greasy. In my case, I like to try to hold both of the apexes of this corner. So you'll see it's kind of like a double apex corner where immediately to my left there's, the first bend, and then there's a little, 6 feet of straight, and then it continues to bend left. I want to clip kind of both of them, and I want my front wheel down in this paint here. And the reason why the second apex is incredibly important is width. Once again, you do not want to be stuck to the right hand side. So you don't want to overcook the corner. You want to be able to stay middle of the track on exit and not be pushed to the right, kind of like you're seeing the guy ahead of me. This allows you to get a nice smooth angle through here. Launch it out, just let it float, clip this apex. All right, so now we're, fully in the downhill run. This is another area where what I do is I lift. So here, I want to get the cart down to the first apex, and I also want to be, preferably this is an early lap, so it's not doing it, but I want my right hand side of the cart in this paint, and I want to take this apex here tight. And again, I do not want to be pushed wide. I want to be, middle of the track. So if we go back a little bit, what's happening here is I'm taking off some speed. Right about here, I'm seeing my apex coming up, and I'll go from 100% throttle to like maybe 90 or something like that. Again, why? Because it pushes the weight forwards, which allows you to get the grip to hold this area and not get pushed wide. So here, I'm now nice middle of the track, and I'm going to aim to clip, the apex down here to the right, this one, and sort of straight line it from here to the next apex, which is the end of the ramp right there. This also involves taking some speed off. So I take a little speed off here, back on, and then I'm taking some speed off right about here. Again, so that I don't, go into the turn too fast, either hit the wall or push wide. And I'm back to full. Okay. So the last bit down here at the bottom of the ramp is interesting because you've got a change of surface right here, where you go from the plywood back to the asphalt. So you go from low grip to higher grip. And you're also fully on power right about here, right? So I'm taking the speed off before I get to the point where my cart is apexed, but I'm getting back on. If I go down to 80 or 90, I'm back on to full at this point. And I'm riding that full throttle pretty much all the way through to the next apex. You need, in my opinion, to use all the width here, which is to let the cart go out to this wall so that you can then clip that next apex where the fellow ahead of me is approaching very, very tightly. And in fact, you'll see that my cart is almost right on it pretty much every time. I'm trying to use the width back at the, I'm trying to use the width back here. Sorry, it's a little hard to do small things, but I'm trying to use the width here, maximize that, so that I can get a nice vertical turn down into this, so that my cart, once again, is not pushed out wide to the right. And you'll see that over here, again, there's more of this, you see this blue and white line that's coming up on the right. Pretty much I don't ever want my cart in there, because if I do, I'm screwed, because I have to make a very, very tight turn to the right, which the fellow ahead of me is about to do. So Here, you're using the width. You will be full throttle, and you're using that width to allow you to be full throttle to pass through this apex tightly and allow you to get back over to the left to then make the very tight right into the closing section. So you see here, and then I want to be all the way back over here. So now I've taken my cart, sort of jogged it quickly back over to the left while still being full throttle to hug this wall so that I can then come in and really clip that bottom apex while still being full throttle and be able to carry full throttle out. And again, if you do it correctly, using all of the width, you don't have to ever reduce throttle in that section, and you can, end up here on the mini straight towards the closing with, good speed and a good angle. And then here, this is very straightforward. You just sort of enjoy the ride, go down the cool little bumpy ramp here, and then set up again for the start-finish turn, where I'm going to lift a little, try to clip that apex, and then back off we go. So, as the tires warm up here, you'll see I go from lifting a little bit here to not, and so forth and so on. But what's really, really changed is you have to be thoughtful with your right foot. Like, you just can't Hulk smash everything anymore. You can't just hold the foot in and hope for the best, because if you don't, you're going to end up wide. Like, you really don't want that. So in order to have good lap times here, you have to be tight to those apexes and not let your cart run wide. And as far as I can tell, the only way to do that is these days with taking off some speed. Now, that's Dennis, who just passed in front of me, and we're going to follow Dennis for a while here in Heat 1. And kind of see how it goes. I think it's helpful sometimes to see somebody in front of you also. So if you get into a situation where there's someone who's got similar pace that you can drive with, go ahead and do it. That being said, when you're following someone, it's really important to not get sort of hyper-focused on them and doing what they're doing, right? You want to be paying attention to where you're going and doing what you need to do, and driving your line and not getting snookered into mentally just mimicking what they're doing. This takes a little bit of practice, but the more you drive with other people, the more you'll be able to sort of look through them and sort of peripherally be aware of where they are. You don't need to focus on their bumper because your brain is keeping track of the guy in front of you. You need to obviously, occasionally give him a glance, but you need to be looking around through the guy towards the next apex, maybe check back to see, a quick little look at his bumper, but then most of your attention needs to be elsewhere. I'm going to go back for a second and show you me not doing a great job in this turn. Okay, so here, this turn is tricky, right? Because it's basically just like a big U, but it's a U where you're doing this sort of inverse trail where you're using throttle, like I said, to slow down, and getting the entry speed is tricky. It takes some practice, and obviously the tires warm up. So here's an example where I'm carrying too much entry speed. I can't get it down to the apex. I didn't let off enough, and you can see I did a little bit of a jerky thing to use the front end as brake, but that's not ideal. What really matters, of course, is if you screw up, don't get angry. Also, by the way, if you carry too much speed through here, another thing that can happen is you can hit this wall here to my left. So if you go cruising out of that turn and slam into this wall or brush this wall or whatever, you carried too much speed into the turn. Remember that it's important to be generating speed through the turn on exit as opposed to into the turn. So if you're going to make a mistake of taking off too much speed into the turn so that you can be back on throttle earlier. You want to, be carrying throttle through the apex here. Like here, I want to be carrying throttle, and if I screwed up and carried too much speed, then I'm taking off speed too late as well, which is compromising my ability to get back to full and drive through the corner quickly. And then that in turn compromises the speed at which you're going to cross the start-finish line and begin your next lap. So again, play with reducing throttle going into that corner. Sort of, if you will, brake in a straight line. You're not braking, you're lifting with your cart against the left edge of the track. I use all of the left edge here. So put your cart up against that wall, start lifting, and then get back to full as you're going through there, and then let it ride through. So let's see, Dennis is holding it a while there, but not. So you can see here, like my cart is really up against this wall, and it's going to be up against that wall such that you can even hear the cart maybe scraping against the plastic if you listen. All right, so let's see how we do through here. So I'm going to, obviously clip this thing very close every time. I'm sort of slidey through here. It's not exactly slidey. You're not drifting at Supercharged. You're in really exaggerated slip angle because of the wood. And then through here, trying to keep it down tight there. I like being tight there, be tight here, take off some speed here so you can hold that tight. Nice line down. Again, I took off some speed before I got to this point. I was taking off speed, I would say, I started thinking about taking off speed at the higher up, like right here. At this point here, you're kind of, the cart settles down because you go from a downhill to sort of a flat bit. This is right about where that I'll take off speed while pitching the cart in the other direction. And then I'm back on full all the way through there, holding that tight, getting the cart over here so I can hold this tight, go through there at full chuff, go fast, as fast as you can, hold the left, take off some speed, and try to get tight to that apex, and so forth and so on. So, that's the basic gist of it, which is use all the track width. Don't strangle yourself going through any of these turns by taking narrow entries. This turn, hold the right-hand side, aim for an apex you can't see higher up the hill. So, late apex it. Here, try to keep your cart middle right of the track, away from those blue and white stripes. Here, turn in a little earlier than you think, so that you can get your cart down to the first apex and the second apex, so that you don't end up wide to the right, so that you have a nice run through here. Here I'll take off a little speed before I get to this point so that I can keep my cart tight through there. See how it's right on that line, which spits me out middle, which gives me a direct short run down to here where I'll take off a little speed right about here so I can get down here and be on full, turn it over, full, and so forth and so on. Anyway, I hope this is somewhat useful to you. What changes over time is as your tire heats up, there's less lifting to do. But remember, when I say lifting, I'm not saying go from throttle to no throttle. I'm saying go from 100% throttle to 80% throttle or 90% throttle or whatever the cart needs you to do to keep it tight to these apexes. You want to be tight to the apexes so that you put yourself in a good position to be able to make the various turns. One other thing I guess I'll go into while we're here is sort of operational when it comes to the league. The league, as we know, is time trial, which means we're competing not for position, but for best possible lap time. And it's important to note that in an ideal world, each lap is going to be faster than the last, right? Because two things are happening. Your tire's heating up, and the track itself is getting more gripped up as it warms and carts are going over it. So generally speaking, your fastest lap is going to be lap 12 of 12, assuming that you don't screw it up and you do everything right and blah, blah, blah. So your last 2 or 3 laps are really, really critical because those are the laps where you have the highest probability of putting down a good lap time. And in reality, your final lap is probably the most important one. In this particular case, we're doing this time trial session, and Dennis and I here have clear track, and we're running along together quite nicely. But as you can see, there's starting to be traffic ahead of us. And this session, I didn't manage the traffic well. What I want to do is have clear track towards the end, and what we got was unclear track towards the end. And sometimes this is a little out of your control, but you do have agency. You don't have to, persist. You can slow down. You can let people by. You can do whatever you want to give yourself clear track. And one thing you got to understand is that there is no pass that you will ever do that will be as fast as not having to pass someone. In other words, any interaction you have with another cart on the track will result in a slower lap time than you possibly can achieve. So you really don't want to get stacked up. In this particular case, when they sent us out, 5 or 6 guys in front of me just all sort of went out on top of each other, which wasn't good. They weren't spaced out. I tried to create some space and give myself a clean run, which was going along just fine until I smacked the wall. I let that other fellow by me. I gave him some space. He went off and did his thing. Then Dennis said, "Hey, buddy, I got pace," and he came by me, and I was content with following Dennis. But what ends up happening here is at some point, after we get by this cart ahead of us who lets us by, we all get stacked up. So let's see if I can find that. Doobie-doobie-doo. All right, so it's starting to look pretty crowded here. Yep, now we're starting to see some traffic. And, for right now it's okay, but it's going to start to accordion. And what's going to happen is I'm going to get screwed, ultimately in this heat. Oh, and I've got Wesley behind me now. So this guy lets us by. Wesley's on my butt. I got nowhere to go, and I think Wesley knows that. Dennis ultimately is going to have nowhere to go, and I'm trying to be keeping the space. But you can see we're starting to accordion. So far, not so bad. Okay, now this is where it gets squirrely, right? So 01, who had been running just fine, has an issue and loses pace, and blammo, my lap is done. And more importantly, my lap goes from being done to also my next lap is now done because I'm going to be compromised going over the start finish. So I try to lift here. You'll see that I give a little lift to say, okay, maybe I can get a little bit of space here. So I let off the gas and just give him a little extra space, hoping that, he's now back in the program and it's going to, not have any more issues. But it looks like I should have lifted more or what have you, because ultimately we end up being sort of back on top. I end up being back on top of him. And here we go. Now this lap is going to be no good either. And in fact, this lap is, half a second too slow. This is all happening at the worst possible time. That was our final lap. My next lap, of course, the one that doesn't count, ends up being a 46.9 and change, which coincidentally was Dennis managed to get 46.9 and change as well, because he got a little bit more clear track. So anyway, put yourself in the position where if you see the track getting crowded in your last couple of laps, consider lifting, letting people by before you get to the start finish so that you can have a clean run at your last couple laps. It's really important. If you find yourself wide on all these turns, carry less speed into them. Do what I'm suggesting, which is reduce throttle a little bit more so that you can be tight to your apexes. Anyway, I hope this was useful to you, and I'll see you, next week for week 6 of the series, which will be the last week of the points races, and we'll be on track 2.